Hi, back again. It's the beginning of September, and I want to do a video on some of the things I learned this year, some of the mistakes I made, some of the successes, and some of the things I learned. So I want to talk first about my tomatoes. Now, I grew just this 10-foot bed. It's 10 foot by, I think it's 30-inch inside diameter, but it's a 10-foot long bed. And I strung my tomatoes up with this twine, and it was a good idea last year, but then I reused the twine this year, and it just doesn't work 2 years in a row because it just goes bad. Now you can see on this one the twine broke down at the bottom where I had it staked in, so then my tomato plant falls over, and then I got to wrap it up like this, and it just gets brittle and falls apart. So using the twine for one season is a good idea. Using it for 2 seasons, nah. And I did it just to save myself time. I didn't want to have to go through and cut these 7.5 foot lengths of twine every year. But, you know, that's just the way it is. So that's the first lesson, is use your twine, throw it away, and use fresh stuff the next year if you're tying your plants up, your tomatoes up like this. The second thing I've learned this year is to give my peppers more support. Last year they grew really tall, and this year they grew really tall too. And what I do is about 12 inches up, I put this netting, and I think the netting's about 6-inch square openings there. But I use that netting on all my peppers, and it gives them good support. But when they get this tall, which they're all at least 3 feet tall, and some of them are close to 50 inches tall, it just doesn't give them enough support, especially when you have peppers that are high up on the plant like this, or my Anaheim peppers are up here like this, and these are just small. These are what they'll get. These things will get 6 inches long, and this will get really top heavy, and that's what happened here. They got top heavy and they fell over. So next year what I'm going to do is get another set of netting. I'm going to go 18 inches on this, and then probably another foot, maybe another 18 inches up here, so that the top's up here and gives these peppers more top support so they don't fall over. Makes it easy for me to get into those plants and see what's going on and pick the ripe ones. The third lesson I learned this year was I planted too many hot peppers. So the purpose of planting my hot peppers was to make chili powder. So I pick them, slice them up a little bit, dry them, and then I grind them up into a fine powder, and I use them for putting in salsa and whatever else, other dishes I have. But I've got way too many peppers, hot peppers here. I've got from, looks like here, all the way over to here with my Anaheim. And then I've got long red cayenne here, and then I've got some jalapenos right there. So I've got maybe a foot of jalapenos. I've probably got 3 or 4 plants. Half of that's chili, and the other half is the Anaheim. But that's 7 or 8 feet of hot peppers, and 3 to a row. So I've got 1, 2, 3. There's probably 21 hot peppers, and that's way too much. So next year I'm gonna maybe just go half the bed. And I like the Anaheim. They're easy to work with, and they're big and more productive than working with those little cayennes. So I'm gonna do the Anaheim just by themselves probably next year. Another thing I learned this year was the value of crushed eggshells. And I'm not just talking about crushed, I'm talking about really blended into a fine powder. Last fall, when I was done, I took the top 4 inches of the soil out of every one of my beds, and I sprinkled the ground up eggshells to add calcium, because I had a real problem with blossom end rot on my peppers and my tomatoes. And this year I have no problems at all with blossom end rot and the tomatoes or the peppers. Oops, that one's done. That came out. So no problems at all with any rotting and losing peppers. So they've turned out really well. So I highly recommend that if you want, save eggshells, dry them, wash them and dry them, and then once I've collected like a grocery bag full, I go ahead and put them in a blender and grind them up really well. And when everything's done in my beds, then just take the soil out a little bit, throw it in there, sprinkle it in to spread it out, and then go ahead and put the soil back in the beds, and you'll be good for the next year. Another thing I learned this year is the value of these rocks. I put these rocks in the beginning of the season before I planted anything, and it has made a huge difference in my garden and keeping everything neat and clean. I had mulch down here before, and it had just degraded and pretty much walking around in mud and some wood chips. And of course I tracked that onto the patio because this is my backyard. And it just make a mess. You know, it gets wet, it gets waterlogged and trash around and all that. So I put about an inch or two layer of these red rocks down over landscape fabric, and I barely have any weeds coming up through this at all. And so it's been really a great benefit. This is buying these rocks amounts to half my expenditure on my garden this year. I spent a little over $400, and $200 of it was these rocks. And I've gone all the way down to the end of my back bed and all the way around the corner of the house to the south side of the house where my carrots are. And I'm really happy with the way this turned out. So as you can see, there's barely any weeds, and it's really easy to kill them. I either use Roundup or I'll get in there and just pull them out, but I'm really happy with this. And then using these patio blocks as well was a really good idea. I had these before, but what I did, I laid them down right where I wanted them. So these are sitting on top of the landscape fabric right there. And then I just brought the rocks up to the level of the patio blocks. So it makes it really easy to walk around in and get around in my garden. But this was a great idea and well worth a couple $100 I spent on these rocks. Another lesson I learned this year was how to use my drip line. So my irrigation system. Now I had these two rain barrels separated last year. One was on the other side of the house just collecting water, and I put them together at the beginning of the season, and they're joined together. So I've got about 100 gallons of water right there, and I have 4 lines split that go to different sections of my garden. The one on the top goes out to that garden where I've got my carrots, and I've got 2 drip lines running across every bed. Now what I did was I ran this over to there, up to the bed, split it, ran 2 drip lines across, and then took it down back to ground level, ran it all the way across over to the bed that was across from it at the other side of the garden, and ran the same thing. And I did that with all 6 beds over here. That line goes across to the middle set of peppers, and this line goes across to that one. And when you use your drip lines, you can't use them when you've got newly planted beds. You have to use them once the plants are established, because the roots aren't spread out enough. And the water from the drip line doesn't spread very well. It goes down and spreads, but you want to make sure the plants have deep enough roots before you start using that to water those each of the beds. And until that point, maybe like 3 or 4 weeks after I've planted them, I will hand water everything until I just think they're big enough to, the roots have developed enough where I can use the drip line. Another lesson I learned this year was to put my netting up for my peas right away instead of waiting for them to get established. So on my peas down here, you've seen in other videos, I have 2 rows of peas, the one here and one on the other side of the netting. And once they sprouted, I took this netting in and I staked it down so it wouldn't move around. So I've got peas on each side of the netting, and you can see how they're climbing up the netting. This row is staying on this side of the netting, and this row over here is staying on this side of the netting. So as it grows, as the peas grow, I will be able to get into those nice and easy. I'll see the peas and know when to pick them, and it won't be a mess trying to dig around inside the peas looking for peas to plant or pick. So that was a nice idea, and I used netting that's 6 by 8, and so I got a little overhang on the top there, but that's okay. But I've used that electrical conduit pipe to go across and support those peas. And I use zip ties up there because this peas, they don't get that heavy, so the zip ties work really well in giving me a nice tight stretch on that netting. But I highly recommend doing that if you're growing peas like this, the tall ones. Use this kind of netting. It's got 1-inch spaces, and just let them grow up and everything will be fine. You won't have to worry too much about them being a mess. Another thing I did this year that was different was I normally plant my beans 4 inches apart, and that's what the seed packet says to do. This year I decided to try 3 inches apart and see what happened, and nothing actually happened, at least bad anyway. What I found out was I increased my harvest by 1/3. So with my beans, if you decide you want to go ahead and get beans out, you can go ahead and put them 3 inches apart in a bed. Really get that intensive gardening going, and because they'll still grow. A few got shaded out, but for the most part, the beans grew at the same rate, and everything is pretty much the same size, except for the beans along the front edge, this front edge over here. But the beans turned out really well. I got a good harvest out of them, so I recommend planting them 3 inches apart. Now if you do what I do, and I use this electrical conduit pipe to make racks out to for the climbing plants like tomatoes, squash, cucumbers, pumpkin, that kind of stuff. Doing this support here in the middle really helped. Last year I had a lot of tomatoes on here, and what happened is that pole sagged in the middle, and didn't want to do that this year, so I built this out of a 2x4, and what I did was, this is a 5/8 inch hole and a 1/2 inch pipe. So I put a hole here, and I put a hole on this side, and then one up underneath, and I just went about 1 inch in all 3 places. And then what I did was the vertical poles, I put them in with rebar, so they look slide over rebar, but I did them so that they're pushing inward, and the pressure is on here and helps keep these in the holes so they don't fall out. But that was a really good decision because I didn't have any problems. Of course, my tomatoes are almost gone now, but I didn't have any issues with this pole sagging, and everything was supported really well. Okay, I think that's enough ideas for now. I'll be back with another one in case I figure anything else out or anything else comes to mind. And for now, if you like this video, give me a thumbs up. If you like my videos in general, if they're helpful, got good information for you, then subscribe to my channel. I'll be back again soon with more stuff. Bye-bye.